Hey, we are the heat changers. And are everywhere.
Hello, Cate. Welcome to the second season of the Heat Changer podcast. How are you?
Great. I'm so happy to be here. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And I have a surprise for you. We're going to go back and forth to the US because I want to learn more about that market and what's going on in terms of solar thermal. And so guess what? We're going to start in Hawaii.
I've never been. Let's go.
Okay, so let's get started. My first question is, do you think there are solar thermal systems in Hawaii?
I feel like there must be. Yeah, when I think about Hawaii, all I think about is sun, right? And so yeah, it seems like it would be a natural solution. And then it makes me wonder what kind of needs there are, of course, because it's warm pretty much all the time. So yeah, what are they using that thermal for?
Yeah, so the solar thermal market is probably the strongest in Hawaii than it is in any other state, and that's for a lot of reasons. The first, and my background, I'm a policy guy, and so that's kind of how I look at things. But in Hawaii, there's a few triggers that make solar thermal work. The first is that energy prices are very high in Hawaii because most of the energy comes from fuel oil, which is very expensive. So right now, I think the average kilowatt hour price is almost 40 cents a kilowatt hour on Oahu. It's pretty high. There's no gas, really. There's no natural gas infrastructure. So most of the heat that goes to heating your water comes from electricity. There is a mandate for new home construction that requires solar thermal systems as standard. Sort of like, I know Israel has a similar mandate that has bolstered the industry there. And then climatically, solar thermal works really well in Hawaii. You have a lot of systems that are direct heat, so they're a little bit cheaper than an indirect heating system or a system that uses glycol. And there's just so many solar thermal installers that the price of a solar thermal system is relatively inexpensive. And finally, there's a state tax credit that you can combine with the federal tax credit that make it, such that solar thermal is either the same price or cheaper than a lot of comparative technologies that would otherwise be installed in Hawaii. So I think we like to say that 1 in 2 houses in Hawaii have a solar thermal system on them, a single family home. So it's quite a bit.
Will Giese is the current Senior Director for Government Affairs for the Solaray Corporation, the parent company of Sun Earth Peak, and AET, America's largest domestic manufacturer of solar thermal flat plate collectors, as well as Inter-Islands Solar Supply, Hawaii's largest wholesale distributor of clean energy equipment. Prior to this, he served as the Southeast Regional Director of SEIA, Solar Energy Industries Association. Previously, he was the Executive Director for the Hawaii Solar Energy Association.
How much marketing is needed in a market like that?
In Hawaii, and this is very unique for the United States, but in Hawaii, solar thermal is the standard water heating system for a single family home because of the reasons that I mentioned, because it's been around for so long. So doing something other than solar thermal is a little bit more difficult.
I mean, everything is pretty much ideal in Hawaii, which makes me want to visit even more. But the US, though, of course, is very big, and I'm really curious to know what are the differences in operating in the continental US versus in Hawaii. I mean, there's a huge variety of geography and weather experiences and concerns, and also this enormous dependence on petroleum and fossil fuels to move everything around. So yeah, I'm just curious to know what are the challenges and what are the advantages?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say that, in the US, I really separate commercial and industrial as two kind of different players. On the commercial side, you've got commercial buildings, or we include like multifamily housing or apartments on the commercial side because those are larger systems. They obviously think a lot about energy. There are quite a few national trade associations, for instance, that represent these commercial entities like Amazon, right? Building a giant warehouse, or Walmart, or Target, or some of the industrial players too, like Cargill, or manufacturers And they, over the last 10 years, have really started to think hard about where their energy comes from and whether it's renewable or not, or whether it's low carbon or not. Outside of solar thermal, I mean, they think about this a lot, and they're a big player, I would say, in the United States renewable energy industry, right? Because they're huge buyers of energy. It's a lot easier, and I think there's been more success over the last 10 years making the commercial side more renewable. Amazon, for instance, I think is committed to making a lot of its new warehouses all solar, right? Solar PV. On the industrial side, it's a different story. And part of that is because, the industrial side, more than any other sector, really is beholden to energy prices. And so that really affects, where you're going to put your factory. You're going to put it in the place where the energy is cheapest, right? So we see a lot of manufacturing in places like the South or in Texas, where energy is really cheap and natural gas is really prevalent. And also they have really high energy loads, right? So it's pretty difficult to site one single renewable system on an industrial site to provide all the energy that they need, right? So then you need these hybrid systems. It becomes more complicated. And so decarbonizing that side of the equation is really, really, really difficult. Although I would say that there's lots of different things nowadays that make it more possible. We can talk about those. But certainly in the United States for solar thermal, the bigger the system is, the more likely it seems to be getting installed. And for SunEarth, for instance, our company, we do a lot more commercial work on the continental US than we do residential work, right? So it flips, where we do mostly residential in Hawaii, and we do mostly commercial type work on the mainland.
So how to build trust on a great technology for people who rather have no idea about what it does and how many benefits they can get from it?
Well, in any big change context, you really have to tap into people's hearts before you can leverage all of the information and facts that you have. So for me, it's about getting to what people are feeling about this kind of change. So in the US, because it is, the economy is so driven by automobile companies and fossil fuels, special interests, there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of fear and confusion just in general created on purpose. And so I really respect what Will is doing because it's an uphill battle. So yeah, I think it's super important to paint a picture for people or help people even imagine what this could look like for them. So really sell the problem that they're having and painting a picture of that pain being taken away and making it very clear then to connect the dots how solar thermal can play an important part in that. So yes, even before you even go in with a solution of solar thermal, people need to know there's a challenge.
Yeah, we've been around for 40 years and we have tons and tons of systems out there. I mean, we were replacing some collectors the other days for systems in Hawaii, I think somewhere on the Big Island, that have been up for almost 40 years, and still running. So I think once we kind of get our foot in the door and say, hey, you can include your system as a part of your other system or on its own, it becomes a lot easier to sell it. For us too, on the hot water side, we like to say, hey, our system makes everything better, right? So in the United States, really the federal government is laser focused on one technology for hot water heating, and it's heat pumps. And for us, heat pumps are great. You compare a heat pump with a solar thermal system, but it seems like the federal government is so focused on that one technology that it is to the exclusion of everything else. And so people don't know that there's more than one renewable water heating technology out there that works just as well or works better in some other climates, or can be paired with a heat pump to make the heat pump work better and longer, right? So we like to say it makes everything better.
Do local suppliers have advantages over importers of solar thermal technologies?
There's a few, and part of it comes out of the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, that was passed in 2022, which was this huge, if you're not from the United States, it's this massive policy that was passed by the Biden administration and the government of that time. And it affects all the facets of renewable energy, from generation and PV, energy storage, solar thermal, energy efficiency, EVs, nuclear is included in there, clean hydrogen, lots of different stuff, right? And just kind of a massive amount of investments, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 20 years, right? And within that policy is several different levers that the federal government has created to incentivize and encourage domestic production, right? So we're an American manufacturer. Our larger company, Solaray, owns two of them, which together are the largest flat plate collector manufacturers in the US. And as a result of that, if you install our systems in the United States, you get an additional amount of money in a tax credit back for installing larger systems than you would otherwise, right? So that's an incentive by itself, is that, you know, you get a 30% tax credit and then you get another 10% just for using our stuff in the US, which is huge. There are things like for agricultural grants, there's a grant called the REAP grant, and it can be up to 50% of the cost of your project that the federal government gives you in a grant to build that project. And because we're underutilized technology, we're more easy to qualify for the REAP grant. So there's another one. There are manufacturing tax credits that we're hopefully going to apply to under Section 48, which is part of the tax code, that gives money to companies that are expanding facilities or building new facilities in the United States to build renewable energy products, right? So there's another kind of cash incentive to bring that domestic manufacturing home in the US. And for us, you know, there's lots of solar thermal systems out there. There's lots of manufacturers in the world. I still like to think, you know, I'm an American, but I still like to think that, you know, having the label of Made in America is a good thing, right? You know, we're really proud of it. We're proud that we have an American facility, an American production facility in Florida and in California. We hire people in the United States locally in those communities. We create jobs and we build renewable energy that have a Made in America stamp on it. And so there's just not that many renewable energy companies, at least in the US, that can say that. We've been saying it since 1977.
Cate, do you think that consumers and decision makers in the US do favor products which are locally produced? In this case, the solar thermal collectors, the solar thermal systems. Is the label Made in America, let's say, a unique selling proposition that could be a driver for growth in our industry?
In terms of engaging people, in consumers, in their emotions, I do think that there's an enormous impact in that, because since the implementation of multinational, transnational trade agreements, so many people in the US have profited, and many, many people have been hurt by the outsourcing of a lot of our manufacturing. And so this has become a larger and larger topic for people personally and also politically. So I think it's an enormous advantage, especially for consumers, to say, yes, something is made locally. People identify immediately in how important that is and the positive impact they can make on the community. Businesses, I think it's also important in terms of like a PR perspective, right? You want to be able to say this, you want to be able to say that you're supporting communities. I would be curious to know, of course, businesses are driven by costs as well. So I'm sure Will has to do a lot of talking about, short-term costs versus long-term costs and stability. I mean, we just had a massive disruption in all sorts of supply chains because of how interconnected we are internationally. So then I'm sure that plays a huge part too. So yeah, I think that I see very clear advantages to that. I think that it would be very important to talk about. And yes, if the money works, then I think Will has a great argument.
Besides systems for the residential market, there are other applications of solar thermal. What is your favorite?
Well, there's two kind of really specific segments. One is low-income housing, so multifamily low-income apartment buildings. We do a lot of those projects. We've been doing them for decades, partly because notoriously in the United States, it's been difficult to build renewable energy on low-income housing projects because of capital requirements, because of the total cost of the system and how they're going to pay for it. They're difficult to finance. more difficult than a larger commercial system. But because solar thermal systems are less expensive on their face, and they also qualify for all those same tax credits that a PV system does, we've had a lot of success, and hot water loads in multifamily housing is a big portion of an individual load. And you can hybrid those systems if you want. So we do quite a bit of those, and I think there's quite a lot of potential for doing low-income housing projects for centralized water heating preheats or for domestic hot water usage in those apartment buildings through solar thermal. So I'd like to see more of that in the United States, especially. The other side that I find is a unique, more for kind of our technology, I would say, as our company, is decarbonizing the food and beverage industry. So, we are going to try to get some federal money to build a more efficient flat plate collector that can do higher temperatures. But already our existing line of products can do lots of different food and beverage industry activity, right? So like I mentioned, pasteurization or drying or brewery work and wineries, or even like heating the ground for growing systems and stuff like that. We can do all those different kinds of things. We can do space heating. There's a few systems that we've installed in places like Montana that are like solar thermal awnings over a drive-through, at just kind of a typical drive-through restaurant has done them. And then they use that hot water in their daily activities for that drive-through restaurant, right? So you can imagine that, there's 1 million drive-through Starbuckses in the United States. If every single one of them had a solar thermal awning, that would reduce their energy costs by a huge amount. It would allow us to, have American-made products on this kind of like a quintessential American thing, which is a drive-through. And, you're decarbonizing that entire industry, right? I would imagine that a coffee shop has a huge thermal load for hot water, right? So I find that the food and beverage industry is a really unique opportunity for solar thermal because there's so many applications for hot water, even at the lower temperature range of industrial process heat, right? Under 100 degrees Celsius. And, our system qualifies for all those different applications and tax credits and stuff. So that's one that I'm really, really excited about too.
Solar thermal technologies have been around for a while. They work in multiple industries across the world. They are accessible both in terms of the investment needed and in terms of the stage of development. So how can we bring this topic into the conversation so that people are aware of this other solar option?
What I've witnessed, what I've seen in conversations, it depends again on the level of awareness that people have about the entire ecosystem of green energy, is a lot of fear about, the grid not being able to support it. And people say things like, well, do you know if everybody plugged in their electric vehicles at the same time, it would crash the entire grid? That sort of anti-green energy propaganda that comes up. And so what I would love to be able to do is have conversations that are actually based on a basic level of education about how all this works. So as Will said, there's just a lot of education to be done. So I would like to be able to have some talking points in hand so that, yes, I can break it down. And then also, let people know that it is something accessible, like you said, for them, that there are policies in place that are supposed to make it more accessible. And then also, I would love people to understand that actually, yes, this technology can serve them very well. And it's part of a larger conversation that not everything is black and white. It's not one or the other, that there are many small steps, many small pieces we can put together to have a better whole in terms of our approach to energy.
We like to say we're the ultimate load remover, right? Because, depending on the solar fraction that you design your system to, you could have 100% of a solar fraction where 100% of your load in a year is from solar thermal, right? And that energy is coming right from the sun and just going into a battery, which is a water tank, right? And being used, a highly insulated water tank being used for a bunch of different purposes. So you don't need to build, one of the major problems for EV systems in the US, and this is from my work over the last 10 years, working at places like SIA and doing utility scale system work for PV, is that interconnection and transmission build outs are prohibitively expensive. In my home state of Virginia, if you try to build a utility scale PV system in the state, you're going to be sitting and waiting for an interconnection sign off from the utility and from our regional transmission organization for like 3 years. If you wanted to go install a solar thermal system, as long as you had all the permits for that, you could do it yesterday, because you don't need to build a substation or a distribution station to accommodate that load. We're not really generating energy that we're putting back onto the grid. We're just removing energy that would otherwise go to that building for water heating. So it's kind of the ultimate energy efficiency measure through thermal generation, right? So that's kind of what we like to say. We're removing that. The other thing too is that, like I said, it makes everything better. If you go and look at solar thermal systems paired with gas backup systems, the greenhouse gas emission reduction is quite a lot, because that solar thermal system is working most of the time and your gas system really works as backup. So ideally, we don't really want gas in a low carbon future, but the gas industry is here. We use it for lots of different things. So might as well make that paired with a solar thermal system to make the emissions much lower than they otherwise would be, as opposed to connecting an electric resistance heater to a grid that is by and large fossil fuel powered, like you would see in places like the South, where 80 or 90% of their generation still comes from coal and natural gas centralized plants, right? So there's another reason for you to do solar thermal.
Will, it has been a pleasure working on this episode with you and with Cate. And to finalize it, I would like you to send a final message to the audience. What would you tell them? What would you tell all those who are looking for solutions to decarbonize?
If you're an American company in the United States and you're trying to decarbonize, especially your water heating load, we're the only game in town that's American made. So come and buy from us, right? And we make really good products, and we've been making them for over 40 years. We're really, really good at it. And there's lots of applications for us. And there's a reason that this 30-something guy that worked at the National Solar Trade Association went into the solar thermal industry from that job. And the reason is that I think that our technology works really well. I love that it's American made. Our company is 100% employee owned, if that matters to you. And I think that, we're doing really good stuff in the United States. So if you're one of those people, or if you're just interested in solar thermal for whatever application you want, come find me. I'm pretty easy to find.
Sun Earth Inc. was incorporated in the state of California in May 1978 and has since grown to become one of the most experienced solar thermal product manufacturers in the world. Sun Earth's strength lies in the engineering, manufacturing, and distribution of world-class solar water heating collectors, mounting hardware, ancillary components, and integrated systems at competitive prices for each channel customer.
And are you ready to become a hit changer?